Living paycheck to paycheck can be one of the most stressful financial conditions that you can ever come across throughout your lifetime. In a recent study, 59% of all working Americans in 2019 were living paycheck to paycheck. Fast forward to 2022, the figure had risen from 59% to 63%. So in 2022, 63% of all working Americans were living paycheck to paycheck. And then at the end of last year, which is 2024, the figure had further risen by a percentage to 64%. Currently, as it stands now, there are about 64% of all working Americans who are constantly living paycheck to paycheck. And that simply means that they are one disaster away from financial turmoil and stress. And so in this video, I'll be explaining what really causes living paycheck to paycheck, what the ramifications are, and how you can subsequently manage your finances to lift yourself from the level of economic subsistence, build wealth, and then sustain yourself and your family. And so if you're new here, my name is Nana. I hold a master's degree in business finance. And on this channel, we discuss everything personal finance and personal development. And so without further ado, let's just go straight into understanding what the term living paycheck to paycheck actually means. So living paycheck to paycheck is used to describe individuals or households who have nothing left at the end of the month. That is when their paycheck actually comes in, which means they spend everything on their essentials, on their needs and their wants. And at the end of the month, they don't have anything left to save or to invest. And so with that said, we go straight into understanding what causes living paycheck to paycheck. And I've grouped that into two, that is the macroeconomic conditions and the microeconomic conditions. So for the avoidance of doubt, the macroeconomic conditions are conditions that happen within the economy that households and individuals have no control over. We'll come back to that later. But then the microeconomic conditions are the conditions or the decisions that are within your power to make. That is, for example, purchasing items, budgeting, managing your money, saving, and investing. These things are within the ability of the individual or the household to exercise in a bid to meet their financial goals at the end of the month. On the other hand, the macroeconomic conditions that can come in the form of inflation, which we don't have any power over. So inflation, for the avoidance of doubt, is the rate at which the prices of goods and services in an economy go up. So holding all other factors constant, the prices of the things that we buy, that is the rent, the mortgage, the bills, and everything that we pay for in an economy would rise over time. And that is what is known as inflation, the rate at which these prices of the goods and the services rise. And that is something that we don't have any control over. It is only the Federal Reserve Bank, or in England, the Bank of England, that has the power through the Monetary Policy Committee to actually try and then manage what inflation would be or reduce the level of inflation that we see in an economy. So that is not something that we can actually do much about. However, what we can do is to invest so that the returns on our investment would actually offset the impact of inflation or the ramifications of inflation over time. And so this brings us to the second category, that is the microeconomic conditions that cause living paycheck to paycheck. And the first thing that we need to consider is high interest debt. So high interest debt is any debt that is likely to eat deeply into your savings or the money that comes in at the end of the month. And at this point, the best example of that is credit card debt. So on average, the APR on any credit card debt is hovering about between 21 and then 23%, which means that you're paying or servicing that debt at a rate of 21%. The ultra rich do not even have the means or the ability to pay a 21% interest on their debt. On average, they pay between 8 to 10% on their corporate loans that they take from the banks. And so at this point, what you need to know is that you need to try as much as possible and then offset that debt. You can use the debt avalanche method or the snowball method. The snowball method simply means that you need to pay the small interest debts first, and then in the long run, you can offset the big ones. However, the debt avalanche method means that you offset the bigger loans first or the bigger debts first, which also decreases your exposure to paying high interest rates. So we'll come back to all these things later in the video. This brings us to the second microeconomic condition that leads to living paycheck to paycheck, which is living above your means, or what is otherwise known as lifestyle inflation. So when people earn more, they tend to also increase their desire for luxury items and things that are quite unsustainable financially. So what you want to do instead is to cut down on any expenditure that eats into your savings and your investments. Try as much as possible and then live below your means. So you can do that through budgeting which we'll be discussing subsequently in the video. With all these said and the understanding that we have from the beginning of this video, what can we more importantly do, or the measures that we need to adopt in order to avoid living paycheck to paycheck and then steer ourselves towards financial freedom? So the first thing that you need to consider is that anytime that you're paid, you need to try as much as possible and then check if you're paid rightly. That is the number of hours that you worked, your wage per hour, and then make sure that all these things tally and that you're paid right. Because if you're not paid right, then it means that at the end of the day, every single budget or anything that you're likely to pay for would actually exceed the money that is coming in. And at this point, I've seen several people say that, oh, but I'm paid right. I don't have to always look at my paycheck. The truth is that the accounting department is also made up of human beings, which also means that they can make mistakes when it comes to calculating your wages and your salary at the end of the month. And so you may want to take that into your own hands, take responsibility for how much you're paid for, and then match it against the number of hours that you've worked to be rest assured that whatever you're receiving is exactly what you need to receive. That can help you also to ensure some level of discipline when it comes to budgeting. This brings us to the second strategy, and that is to pay yourself first. According to the richest man in Babylon, 1/10 of everything that you earn at the end of the month is yours to keep. So this is what you want to do. Set aside, first of all, before you go on to make any subsequent payments, 10% of your paycheck, and then put that into an emergency fund or a savings account. And that would serve as a fallback if the unfortunate economic turmoil hits subsequently in the future. This brings us to the third strategy, which is what you need to do when you're paid in order to avoid living paycheck to paycheck. And that is to budget 50% of your income for basic needs. That is your rent, your water, your electric, your gas, and all those necessities or things that keep you up and then going. And then budget the further 30% for your wants. That is anything that is also likely to help you or to sustain you in the course of living. That is sometimes taking care of the kids, or maybe investing in yourself by way of buying courses, or paying for things that are likely to also increase the likelihood of you earning more income in the future. The further 20% can also go into savings or investment. So that is what you can actually do, and that is the surest way for you to build wealth and to leave the chain of having to live paycheck to paycheck. This brings us to the fourth strategy, and that is to tackle your debt. So high interest debts like credit card debts would actually eat so much into your finances, and on average you're paying 21% on that debt. So holding all other factors constant, if you owe $1,000, that means you're paying $210 in interest, and that is quite unsustainable because even the richest people in the world borrow at extremely lower interest rates, that is between 8 to 10%. This brings us to the fifth strategy, which is to budget for fun and entertainment. And at this point, people would say, now, this is an extremely irresponsible advice. But I tell you that the more happier you are, the more likely you are to also go on to do the needful things, which includes instilling discipline in yourself in order to achieve those goals. So in the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey highlights one thing there, that people tend to focus on the goal so much that they actually avoid, or they tend to omit, the production capability. The production capability in this case is you, the individual, because you are the one working, trading your time in exchange for that paycheck. And so anything that affects you would likely affect the income. And so you need to sustain yourself. Try as much as possible and take care of yourself. Make sure that you're happy, because the more happier you are and the more healthier, more importantly, that you are, the more you increase the likelihood of sustaining that income that subsequently comes every single month. And so without you, there's nothing like a paycheck. And that is why you want to focus and then ensure your safety and, more importantly, your health, in order to ensure the subsequent increase in any form of income that comes at the end of the month. This brings us to the sixth and last strategy, which is to review and then adjust. So what you can do is to subsequently go through all these steps every single month, but don't be afraid to change things. So for example, the further 20% in the 50-30-20 budgeting rule that I spoke about earlier can also go into servicing your debts, because you're better off servicing those debts as opposed to investing or saving that 20%, because the 21% average APR that you're paying to service your credit card debt would actually eat into your savings and your investment, which means it would even make every form of income or any returns coming from savings or investment redundant in the end. So you might want to just adjust things and change things around to suit your financial condition, which would also ensure that you attain your goals and subsequently leave the chain of living a paycheck to paycheck. Thank you for spending time with us, and see you in the next video.